Girl, you don't want to seem weak, do you? Never let them see you sweat. Always keep a poker face and never reveal what's going on. Have you ever heard these phrases or even said them to yourself? Well, those are the opposite of vulnerability and how to connect in your relationship. So, we're going to dig into the topic of vulnerability and why you need more of it. Welcome to the secret formula of femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back, everybody, to the secret formula of femininity. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole, and your guide to really connecting to your true feminine essence. And so today, this is a topic that is dear to my heart. Couldn't wait to get into it. We got some juicy questions to answer at the end, but I wanted to first share my story. So I know I'm a big advocate of vulnerability now, but how did I get there? And how did I go from a sensitive child that felt like I had to hide what was really going on with me to someone who now tells other women that you need to be more vulnerable in your relationship? So there was a time where I didn't believe it, but I believe I was socialized into the common belief around me, which is that you're too sensitive, you need to hide your vulnerability. Um, it's not a good look, it's going to make you seem weak. And I used to really have conversations in my head, and this is as a little girl, 7, 8, 9 years old, thinking to myself that I shouldn't say this, I shouldn't say that, because I was afraid that I would be rejected or that I would be called too sensitive or that I would be misunderstood. And that's the core thing that happens with people with vulnerability is like a fear of being misunderstood and then rejected or left out because of it. And so this went on for a while, and it was a real conflict for me because internally, my nature was to not be afraid of showing my weaknesses or my so called weaknesses or my real feelings or what I was going through. But I would, being the sensitive child, perceptive child that I was, I would pick up on messages that no, you should not do this. And from the bullies that I encountered to even how when I told people I was being bullied as a little kid, they were like, girl, what? Like everyone was portraying this tough exterior as if nothing hurt them, nothing bothered them. And I understand it, right? There is a time and a place to have your boundaries, to have a no nonsense type of attitude. But we can't walk through life like that all of the time. And I actually really realized that as I got into my teenage years and my early 20 years, because I realized that it took too much work to push down all of my feelings, all of the things that I was seeing. Like when you're a sensitive person, you pick up on a lot of things. And if you're constantly having to push all that down or act like it doesn't exist, again, what are you doing? You are wearing the mask. Can anybody relate to that? Now imagine what it's like to start wearing a mask not only in school or with your friends, but then you carry this into your relationship and you carry this into the person that you say you want a commitment with, where you are keeping up that mask. You're not expressing yourself. You're doing the opposite of all the stuff that we say is important for relationships. What are some of the things that you hear people talk about that are needed to have healthy relationships? One is communication. It's a word that we use a lot. But actually, what are we communicating? Part of it is that if you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable, you're not truly communicating who you are. And part of communication is expression and allowing someone to get know you. You're sharing what you want them to know, but that also is to allow someone to know you, to get close to you, and to connect to you. All right. And so once I finally understood the power almost of reconnecting to who I really was, which was someone who, even as a child, I understood intuitively that having weaknesses or being vulnerable was actually a strength, because I understood it's almost like a tree, right? The one that is able to, the pliable one, the healthier branch is able to be more flexible and able to withstand actually some of the harshness of the conditions. It's the old one that can't, is not flexible at all, that sometimes gets dried out. It ends up just toppling or being destroyed in extreme conditions because it's too dry, it's too stiff, and it can't adapt. And that's how I look at vulnerability allows us to be present and be able to perceive what's going on with ourselves. It's a form of self-awareness, but also to quote read the room. And we're going to get into that in a minute, okay? So, I want you to think about it. What has been your story with vulnerability? I know for me, I can remember some key conversations that I have had with friends, with close family members, with my husband, and even with my kids. With kids, it's a little bit different, right? But where it was one of those, it was a conversations, each one I remember, where my heart was racing. And I came to realize that when your heart is racing or you feel like a feeling in your throat that like you're nervous, that is a physical sign that you actually need to speak. And there's something that you're afraid to express that you need to speak on, that you need to share, and that fear is a sign of just how important it is. And that's a sign that you actually need to, it's okay to acknowledge the fear, but you actually need to speak. You need to put yourself out there and allow yourself to be vulnerable. So let's back it up a bit and get to some definitions or a definition. What exactly is vulnerability? It is really about being open and honest with your feelings. It's about being able to connect to your needs and desires and allowing yourself to express them, which means you're allowing yourself to be seen, whether you're imperfect. Like we all are imperfect. So it's allowing yourself to be seen, imperfections and all, without focusing too much on the judgment. I won't say it's a complete absence of being judged, but it's acknowledging that you can't control that, right? And so when you embrace your vulnerability, you're actually embracing and expressing more of yourself. And you hear it all the time when people are even advising people on social media or building an audience or anything in business or advertising, marketing, they all talk about the importance of relatability. But what that really is, one of the keys to that is vulnerability. People want to see, people want you to pull back the veil. They want you to pull back the curtain because they want to feel like they have a peek into who you are. And that frees people up. That allows them, it gives them a bit of permission to be more of who they are. You see, we are social beings. And so it's the animal kingdom, right? We have to gauge how safe something is. And when we can see that someone else is being vulnerable, it almost gives us a sense of safety that we can also be vulnerable. So, what does this actually look like, right? For all of my women, there's so many labels that strong women get, right? It's the strong black woman, the superwoman, the alpha woman, the boss chick. And for a lot of women who are in that mode of the strong, the one that gets it done, the ambitious woman, it can feel like vulnerability is the exact opposite of what you need to be doing because it's perceived or it's seen as a weakness. I remember working with a group of women in one of my coaching programs, and everybody really said that they identify with being somehow being called a strong Black woman, a superwoman, and they felt conflicted. Part of them didn't like all that came with that. But another part of them felt like, well, if I'm not that, then I'm going to be the opposite, which is trampled all over. And they saw vulnerability where they might say, I can't handle this, or this is too much, or even sharing their emotions. They saw those things as very, very risky and something that would make people not respect them. And what I really had to break down is when you get into the science of it, right? Vulnerability is part of your being authentic. And it's what allows people to feel connected to you. It draws them into you. They're able to relate to you and they actually feel safer with you, which is going to put you, in a better position. That's why if you think about it, like even with leaders, the leaders that try to come with an iron fist, they rule by fear, but not necessarily by respect or, true following. It's the people that understand that you have to connect on a human level. That's where people want to connect to those as well. So, what is this? Let's talk about this in terms of your relationships. If you think about this goes, this goes for friendships and family relationships, but let's take it to romantic relationships. If you are in a place where you are not showing anything, any imperfections, whether it's, I saw a funny video where uh, they were talking about where some women will go to bed with a full face of makeup and wake up before their partner to put makeup on again because they don't want to be seen with any imperfections. And that's just on a physical level. But what about on any other level? Emotionally, it means like you don't want to show that you're struggling. You feel like if you don't show that you always have it all together, you're going to be taken advantage of or you're not going to be respected. And I know we talk a lot about how men really crave and need respect, but women do as well. Women want to be respected. It's part of our protection as well. And so there's this myth that if you don't look like you have it all together at all times, then you're not going to be respected. Okay, so let's dispel that and we're going to get into some research that actually shows the opposite, right? But some of the benefits of learning to embrace your vulnerability, which is really that open, honest sharing of your feelings, of your needs and your desires. Feelings, I notice people are able to share sometimes, but it's that part about your needs because that makes us feel like we're a step down or we're losing our leverage. So a lot of times we don't want to express our needs or even our desires because we fear that we're going to be told no or we're going to be rejected or we're going to be made to feel silly about it. But at the end of the day, the benefits of learning to be more vulnerable far outweigh the risks. And actually, the more you are able to get comfortable with your vulnerability, you will become stronger and stronger emotionally as to where uh, rejection isn't going to, it's going to not going to hit you as hard because you know that when one door closes, there's literally another one waiting to open, and that you're positioning yourself to get more of what you want. So, vulnerability, it leads to more relatability, more authentic connections, people that really you can connect with because there's a core trust and understanding. Also, emotional freedom. I cannot tell you I've seen women learn to just use more feelings words in communicating with their spouse. And it's like a weight lifts off of them because it's like an emotional freedom. They're no longer suppressing. They're no longer overthinking, oh my God, how do I say this? What do I do? How do I say this in just the right way? They learn to have more emotional freedom, less suppressed emotions, which actually helps them to feel better about themselves. Also, again, resilience. We I'm for the resilient Black woman. I am not necessarily here for the strong Black woman, because the strong Black woman has been an image of almost like a mule, a worker horse who can withstand anything. Resilience is another thing. It says that I'm human. I hurt. I get tired. I can't do it all. But I'm able to come back if I need to. Resilience requires rest. So it's not just pushing through. And when you're more vulnerable, you're more able to learn to overcome some of your fears of taking risks, which actually makes you emotionally stronger. And I want you to really get this difference between um, emotional strength and just strength of pushing through and ignoring your needs. We all need a level of emotional resilience or strength, in that we have to learn to deal with difficult emotions and feel difficult emotions. This is a plug for the movie Inside Out, right? All emotions are important. So we don't want to suppress certain ones. And we have to be okay with the ones that seem a little more negative. And in order to do that, we have to have emotional resilience. Okay. And of course, being vulnerable is not just about connecting to other people, but it actually leads to your own personal growth. It's part of your emotional intelligence and being able to just be at peace with yourself. So I know you probably heard of one of the biggest well known, I'll say, researchers into vulnerability, which is Brene Brown. Okay. She's written a lot about it, she's done research. And one of the core things is being vulnerable leads to a sense of belonging. And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. We ultimately are part of the animal kingdom, and there's certain instincts that we have. Everything from how we listen to a person's tone of voice to looking at those what we call micro expressions on their face, we're always looking to determine, even if it's not consciously, but to determine how safe another person is for us. Whether it's like physical safety, when we're out and about with strangers, or even the safety, that's part of how we're gauging if we want to develop a friendship or a relationship with someone. We're looking for how emotionally safe they are. Just think about some interactions you've had. Let's say you go to a conference or you go somewhere. Um, like next week, I'm going to a summit. A bunch of people I haven't met before. Part of it is, you walk in and you're scanning the room, and you make small talk. People come up to you, you might go up to them. And part of what you're assessing without even knowing it is like whether or not you want to continue to talk to somebody, whether or not you feel like they add value or whether or not they feel safe, right? So there's so much that you're trying to determine. And when other people can let down the veil a little bit, it also is a signal that you can let your veil down a little bit and be a little bit more vulnerable, AKA feel like you belong and connect with them. And so, again, it's like this dance. We mirror each other, it's a back and forth. You take one step, they take one step. They take one step, you take another. It's that type of dance. Also, in your relationship, vulnerability is key. And this is the hard part. And I talk about this in my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint, where especially when you're first meeting someone, ladies, you want a relationship, you're being courted, you're just connecting, and I hear everyone talking about, I'm dating with intention. My intention is to get married. But what does that actually look like? It's a balance between having boundaries but not barriers, right? So vulnerability is not going to meet someone and the first day you guys just start trauma dumping and talking about bonding over all of the horrible things that you've been through, or they're sympathizing with you, or you're sympathizing with them, that is not the basis of a healthy connection. It might feel cathartic. It might feel like, oh my God, this felt, so great to be understood and seen, but it's too much. It's like you're dumping, and you don't necessarily know if that person, you know, if they need to know all of that. So, vulnerability is something that happens in small ways, in doses. It could be just simply, if you all go out, it could be sharing how oh my God, I've always wanted to go to this restaurant. It reminded me of X, Y, and Z, right? Like, so you can share a little bit of personal information about yourself, really tap into those emotion words, but it doesn't have to be a full fledged, like, let's get serious and talk about all of this deep emotional stuff from the get go. That is too much. So it's really about balancing. And then the way it should go is like, in the beginning, you should have more boundaries. And as you get closer, ideally letting those boundaries down, letting those walls down, and connecting emotionally, sharing your needs and your desires. Sometimes, though, what I see with a lot of women is it's the opposite. From the beginning, you're oversharing, and then the more you kind of get to know that person, you get scared. It's almost like buyer's remorse. Like, did I do too much? You get scared, you start putting up walls and being less vulnerable, less expressive, and less like sharing of your true self. And then you wonder, like, well, what happened? We were so connected, and now it feels like we don't even know each other. It's because the whole cycle or the pattern was done in the opposite of the healthy way. All right. So again, think of it like uh uh what is it, like those freight elevators where like the door or the gate slowly comes down, right? Slowly comes down, and then the cargo can be put in to the space. But it's not supposed to quickly come down and then all of a sudden, when it's time for the cargo to get in or whatever, the door goes back up. And that's what a lot of us are doing in our relationships. So all kinds of research on how vulnerability actually helps with deepening your intimacy and building trust. Also, your communication. I cannot wait till we really go deep into soft communication, because part of what you need to communicate, it's like a dance. You need to know when to step this way. You need to know when your partner is stepping that way. Anybody ever watch like Kizombo dance? It's a very sensual, almost like salsa, but it's Portuguese, and you see it in Angola and other places. And it's that smooth connection between the two. One person can't go one way and then the other go the other way. Like, it's really a dance. And that's what soft communication is. It's you sharing your stuff and you giving space for the person to share their stuff. And that does take a great deal of vulnerability, because if you look at that dance, a lot of that, especially when the man is leading and he's pulling her back, leaning her back, it takes trust in yourself and trust in that other person, right? So it's the communication when you're able to be vulnerable and tap into feelings words. Ladies, let's like get real with this. One thing that happens often is we communicate in a way that's more like we're sharing information, as opposed, so we're communicating to inform versus communicating to connect. And communicating to connect is very different than just sharing information. Sharing information is like, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. This is going on. It's almost like a checklist, like you're a teacher. Communicating to connect requires using more emotion words, more tones of voices, that like where you're sharing your emotions, like, hey, babe, I'm really tired today. I was thinking I would love if you could pick up dinner for us from our favorite takeout place, please. Right? That's just an example. But what I'm saying is when you share why something is important to you, what you desire, what you want, even on a small level, that helps you to connect more. And so there's different ways to communicate, to connect, but one of them has to do with sharing your vulnerability. And so even when you and your partner have like a disagreement about something, a lot of times people want to argue or fight on logic alone. And it's important to put why you have a certain position, why it has meaning to you versus just uh, using the logic card. You got to use the emotion card. Why does some how do you feel about something? Does it hurt you? Does it excite you? Does it make you scared? Does it make you curious, right? And why? Connected to something, this scares me because when I was younger, I never got to dream big. I always was afraid to dream big. So this is really important to me, baby, because I'm allowing myself to dream big with you, right? You see how I flipped in those emotion words and past experiences and made it personal? You can do that in small ways, and that's really going to connect you in your relationship. All right. And then, of course, vulnerability is a form of empathy. It fosters empathy, it allows people to empathize with you. And also, once you're vulnerable, you can understand what it's like for somebody else to be vulnerable. I know, like, when I've been in situations where my heart was beating and I just knew I had to say something, or my voice was shaky, it gave me much more empathy and respect for people who did that with me. For example, even my child or my husband, maybe his voice isn't shaking, but if I could tell, like, okay, when someone wants to say something that is important to them and they don't know how you're going to take it, you need to understand that that's a vulnerable moment for them. And it's a way of creating what we call a compassionate relationship environment. A compassionate relationship environment where vulnerability becomes the norm. And it doesn't always, somebody has to take the first step, right? It doesn't just happen in this even way where both people are just automatically vulnerable. It has to be that sometimes one person has to take the risk. And so if you really want your relationship to blossom and to really like be on another level of emotional intimacy and connection, sometimes you have to be the one to take that first step. Okay. So, how do you do that? Let's get into some actionable steps. And I have two questions that are really awesome from people that I think probably speak to what a lot of women feel about vulnerability. But what are some action steps that you can take in order to start to be more vulnerable? One is start small. Start small. I gave a few examples earlier. I had to start small. When I stopped doing what I felt society wanted me to do, sometimes it would be to tell somebody if they hurt my feelings when I was younger, or it would be to allow myself to cry, even first, if it was first with myself, or it would be to have a conversation where I felt my heart racing and I was like, okay, I need to say this because something in my body is scared to do it, which means I need to do it. So you want to start small. Set boundaries. Boundaries are key, right? So you can be open, that is important. But like I said earlier, you don't want to just go around like telling everybody everything about your life. You have to have discernment. And your level of vulnerability should be based on your level of understand, like trust or some sense of safety or integrity with that person, right? So let's dispel the myth that being vulnerable is just going out without discernment, without boundaries, and telling everybody everything about you. It is not full transparency, but it is learning to connect on an emotional level. And it's up to you, right? Some people literally say, I'm an open book. That's just who I am. And that's fine. But I would tell everybody that you need to have some boundaries in place that has to do with like determining if someone is safe enough for the level of vulnerability that you're about to share with them. Also, take some time, of course, for self compassion, but also to reflect on your experiences. Like, what has it been like? I remember when I was very intentional and deliberate about not really holding in or suppressing my emotions. And sometimes I would journal about it or just sit back and, like, oh my gosh, how does this feel that I'm doing more of this versus doing more of the other thing? And then also, you want to be with supportive, you want to seek support. It's so important to seek support and to be with like minded people. If you're always with women who are only in the boss chick alpha mode, they're going to actually look down on you for being more vulnerable a lot of times. And sometimes those women that may look down on your vulnerability, they may do things like they might mock you or they might give advice that is completely wrong, as far as like, girl, don't tell him that, or they give you advice that have to do with breaking up your relationship. And that's from their own understanding. It's not necessarily from a malicious place, but you want to be mindful. Listen to how the other people you're around, how they talk about men, how they talk about relationships, whether or not they seem to be on their own personal growth journey and really trying to understand their emotions and their own vulnerability. And it doesn't mean that you completely cut them off, but it does mean you want to be mindful of just the environment and the people that you're around, the circle that you have. So let's get into these questions. The first question that somebody sent me was, how do I overcome the fear of being judged when I'm vulnerable? Very good question, right? Because we're afraid sometimes of judgment and rejection. The key is self acceptance. No one can reject what you accept. So it starts with self acceptance. And rather than seeking validation from others, really asking yourself, what does this thing mean to you? Whatever it is that you're feeling vulnerable about or expressing vulnerability about, what does it mean to you? Why is it important? Why is it significant to you? And really going into a place of self acceptance versus external validation or external acceptance. So once you accept yourself, you become a magnet for other people accepting you. It's like when we talk about confidence, it draws in the right people. The second question is, can being too vulnerable push people away? Can being too vulnerable push people away? I love this. And this has to do with what we talked about earlier with boundaries, right? It's important to share, keep the A word in mind appropriately. It's not that being vulnerable pushes people away, but when you show that you don't have boundaries, that is a sign that pushes people away, even unconsciously, because it's a sign that like you're not stable, to be quite honest. And so when you set boundaries, you start sharing with people, the right people, people who they respect and value you. You're not just sharing with any Joe Schmo on the street. Authenticity is not oversharing. It means being honest in a way that feels safe and right with you. Let me say that again. Vulnerability is not oversharing. It's sharing in a way that feels right and safe for you. So you're not going and just being an indiscriminate open book. You are having the right boundaries. And again, that is going to be a sign of strength versus a sign of weakness or overly neediness. Now, you should be able to share your needs within your relationship, first and foremost. But just going out to everybody and not having emotional control, like that can come across, that can push people away. But when you have the right boundaries and you share appropriately in a way that's safe and right for you, then no, all it does is draw people to you. So I hope those two questions are things that answer questions that you might have. Don't forget, you can send me questions. You can email me, you can send them, post them on the podcast, and I will answer your questions. So, thank you so much for joining on this episode. I hope you found it really enlightening. And I want to point out again my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint. It goes deeper into this topic. It's especially for women who are finally ready to win at love. Knowing that balance between self love and connecting with others, how to be vulnerable, how to have boundaries, and just be that love magnet that draws healthy masculine men to you. That's what it is all about. Okay? So I will see you on the next episode. Until next time, make sure you embrace your power, nurture your spirit, and connect to your feminine essence and let it shine. Take care.